Silence stretched between them. The candlelight caught the sharp planes of his face, softening them. "You're not wrong," he said finally, "but you left one thing out." "What's that?" "I don't like being alone when it's this quiet." They ended up on the couch, the file on the table between them. Without the constant buzz of devices, the penthouse felt different, more human. Stephen poured 2 glasses of water, and for a while they sat in companionable silence, the city's darkness pressing in. The blackout stretched into its second hour. The generators finally hummed back to life at 11:30 p.m., flooding the penthouse with cool white light. But the atmosphere between them didn't change. The unspoken truths lingered, electric in a different way. As Valeria gathered her things to leave, Stephen said, "I'll have the driver take you home." "I can get a cab." "I insist." She hesitated, then nodded. "Good night, Stephen." "Good night, Valeria." And as she stepped into the elevator, she realized the blackout hadn't just cut the power. It had stripped away a layer of distance neither of them had been willing to touch before. The first thing Lagos gave Valerio Bonduku was noise. Horns braided into sirens, shoe soles to asphalt, bus conductors arguing rates that changed with the wind. The second thing it gave her was heat. It pressed like a hand to the back of her neck as she stepped out of the interstate bus at Djibouti, her single suitcase rolling behind her. Her folder of printed CVs hugged to her chest like a fragile dream. She had promised herself she would not cry. Not at the station, not on the ride to Yaba, not while texting her mother that she had arrived safely, joyfully, bravely. She had also promised that in this city, she would be the sum of everything she had been preparing for. Refined manners, right conduct, keen mind, a Bachelor of Science in accountancy that still smelled of new ink. She would be independent. It would hurt to be far from home, yes, but it would be a good, necessary kind of ache. The kind that signals growth. Her best friend Zainab met her outside a pharmacy on Herbert Macaulay Way, grinning and waving a nylon bag like a flag. "First rite of passage," Zainab said, thrusting a bottle of cold water and a meat pie into her hands. "Welcome to Lagos, Madam Accountant." They split an Uber to a tiny studio in Yaba with a stubborn fan and a view of a mango tree that refused to fruit. It was small, clean, and exactly the size of the life Valeria could afford. That night, after a quick call with her mother, "I am proud of you, Nem." Valeria arranged her shoes beneath the bed and placed her CVs on the table like an altar. She set an alarm for 4:45 a.m. The city was a test. She would be early. By the end of the first week, she had learned the rhythms of applications and rejections. She learned that HR emails could be both prompt and silent, that promises to circle back often did loops that never closed. Still, she ironed her blouse and skirt every night. Still, she said good morning to every receptionist, as if the words themselves were keys. On Monday of the second week, Zainab forwarded a listing with no company name. Executive assistant to CEO. Financial acumen required. Resilience non-negotiable. The pay made Valeria blink. The address made her sit up straighter. Echo Atlantic. Glass, steel, and ocean wind. The place Lagos built to tell the world it would not be ignored. "Anonymous posting?" Valeria asked. Zainab leaned over her shoulder, chewing groundnuts. "Rumor says Yakuta Group, oil, infrastructure, tech, and thunderbolts, and the CEO is, well, you've read the gossip. Everyone had. Stephen Yakutu was a headline that wrote itself. Arrogant, mysterious, incredibly handsome. A tyrant multimillionaire. Women chased him, he left them exhausted like runners who realized too late they'd been sprinting after a mirage. He didn't say please or thank you. He fired employees with a flick of his hand. He was a storm in a well-cut suit. Apply, Zainab said. Worst case, he rejects you and we go buy small chops. Valeria applied. She tailored her cover letter to the anonymous voice on the listing, framed her audit internship and the University Association treasurer role as proof she could hold numbers and people in a steady grip. She wrote that she was calm under pressure, that she believed in the dignity of preparation, and that she refused to cut corners, even when nobody was watching. She clicked send, exhaled, and said a small prayer to the god who counted hairs in job openings. The reply landed the next morning. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Bring proof of identity. Dress formally. A signature appeared at the bottom like a quiet threat. Yakutu Group. Zainab whooped so loudly the neighbor knocked to ask if they were okay. We are more than okay, Zainab said through the door. We are stepping into destiny. Valeria arrived at Eco Atlantic at 7:42 a.m. because early had always been her superstition. The building rose like a blade, mirrored glass catching the sun. Inside, the lobby breathed cool air in expensive silence. Valeria approached reception, palms just a little damp. The receptionist scanned her appointment code and smiled professionally. You're early. Elevator's on the right, 36th floor. In the elevator, Valeria watched the numbers climb and steadied her breath. She thought of her mother teaching her to balance a water bucket at 6, saying, straight back, my girl, even when the road is sand. She thought of the nights she studied while her siblings slept, of the way her father's hands looked after a long day at the workshop, cracked but gentle as he turned her flashcards. She thought, whatever waits above, I can face it without breaking the person I am. At the 36th floor, the doors opened onto a corridor of glass-lined offices, the lagoon glittering beyond. A woman in a navy dress greeted her. HR, this way. They gave her a short written test first. Excel logic, reconciliation, a scenario about a calendar clash. She finished carefully, checked her work twice, and handed it in. Then they ushered her into a stark meeting room with a view that made her feel like an ant with good posture. The man who entered did not knock. He didn't need to. Authority preceded him like a perfume. Stephen Yakutu was taller than the camera lenses suggested, tapered like a spear, the kind of handsome that looked bored by itself. His suit obeyed him. His eyes were a winter Lagos doesn't have. He sat, not across from Valeria, but at the head of the table, a subtle correction. Name, he said. Valeria Obenduku, sir. Valeria. He tested it as if it were an acquisition. Accountancy. Yes. He skimmed her CV with a glance quick and cold. Why Lagos? It is where the biggest problems are, she said before caution could smooth the edge. And I like solving things. One of his eyebrows lifted, a fractional concession. This role is not accounting. It is obedience under fire. I understand schedules, budgets, and people, Valeria replied. I can triage, I can listen, and I don't panic. You will if I want you to. He said it without malice, as if predicting weather. You will be tested. I prefer that to being ignored, she said steady. A silence. The lagoon glittered like a dare. He pushed a tablet toward her. An email sat open, a draft to a board member about a site visit and a delayed environmental report. Fix that, he said. You have 2 minutes. Then tell me why my 11:30 must move without insulting the CBN director who occupies it. Valeria read the draft. It was blunt in a way executives use when they were tired of performing politeness. She softened the edges without blurring the truth context before request accountability, before ask. Then she outlined 3 options for the 11:30. A working breakfast on Friday at the recipient's office, a 20-minute corridor brief after a symposium both would attend, or a virtual brief with pre-circulated memos to honor the director's time. Stephen read her edits. His face said nothing. You've observed my calendar? I saw the symposium invite on the lobby screen, she said, and the director prefers Fridays. There's a paper about it. She didn't add that she'd memorized the man's media habits 2 years ago for a university debate. Stephen set the tablet down. People usually flatter me to survive an interview. I don't flatter, Valeria said. I serve the work. Sentimentality. Standards, she corrected gently. For the first time, his mouth moved like it was considering a smile and rejecting the idea on principle. My assistant quit yesterday. Lasted 3 months. Before that, 2 weeks. Before that, 8 hours. He steepled his fingers. Do you know what that means? That you need the right assistant, Valeria said, not a braver one. He stood. The interview was over, or about to change shape. Follow me. He walked quickly. Valeria kept pace. They cut through a warren of glass offices to a corner view of the Atlantic that made the city look like an idea. He stopped before a desk with 2 monitors, a color-coded whiteboard, and a stack of files that appeared to have multiplied in the night. "This is the job," he said. "Inbox triage, calendar defense, numbers that don't lie, words that don't waste time, and the one rule." Valeria waited. "I don't repeat myself." She met his gaze. "Understood." He looked at her for a long moment, as if measuring the exact volume of her resolve. Then he nodded once. "HR will send the offer. Start tomorrow, 6:30 a.m. He was already turning away when she said, "Sir?" He paused. "I appreciate the opportunity." "You will earn it," he said, not unkindly, and disappeared into his office with the door closing, like a verdict. Back in the elevator, Valeria leaned her head against the cool mirror and let the relief show for 3 seconds. Then she straightened. If Stephen Yakutu was a storm, she would be the house that didn't flood. Not by becoming stone, but by learning the channels, where to let water pass, where to build a dam, where to open a door and let the tide in. Outside, Lagos glittered the way only a city does when it believes in itself. Valeria texted her mother, "I got it." She texted Zainab a string of emojis that looked like fireworks. Then she bought a celebratory bottle of malt from a kiosk and stood in the sun, drinking sweetness and heat. Across the boulevard, a billboard for Yakutu Group flashed a slogan about building tomorrow. Valeria smiled to herself. Tomorrow she would show up before dawn. Tomorrow she would meet the storm at the door. And tomorrow she would begin the quiet work of taming Mr. Arrogant without ever breaking who she was. The next morning, Valeria was at the Yakutu Group's glass tower before 6:15 a.m., the Atlantic still wearing its gray dawn colors. The lobby smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished marble. She clutched her handbag, rehearsing the promise she had made to herself. Arrive early, stay steady, never lose your composure. She didn't expect her first test to come before she even reached her desk. "Miss Obanduku," the HR officer called as she stepped out of the lift. "Mr. Yakudu asked that you wait inside his office." It wasn't even 6:30. She followed the instruction, heels silent on the plush carpet, and found herself in a room that could have been in any city in the world. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a restless ocean. The desk was black glass and steel, barren except for a single laptop and a silver pen. A wall of books faced a private lounge area where black leather seating surrounded a low marble table. Stephen Yakutu wasn't there. Valeria glanced at the clock, 6:22, and took the chance to study the space. Everything screamed precision. No stray papers, no half-finished coffee mugs. A place that did not forgive clutter. The door opened without warning. "You're early," Stephen said, striding in, navy suit sharp enough to cut paper. He didn't sit. Instead, he placed a thick stack of files on the desk. "These are this week's board reports. Cross-reference the numbers with the monthly summaries in the archive folder on the server." Valeria blinked. "Now?" He looked at her as if she'd asked whether the ocean was wet. "I don't repeat myself." Her laptop hadn't even been assigned yet, but she moved to the desk, switched on the computer already set up there, and navigated to the server drive. The archive folder was a labyrinth, subfolders labeled by year, quarter, and project code. She found the right one, scanned for discrepancies, and began annotating. It was the kind of work that could take hours. She forced herself into a rhythm, scanning columns, running quick calculations in her head, jotting notes in the margins. After 20 minutes, Stephen stepped behind her chair. "You're too slow." "It's my first time navigating your system," she said evenly, still typing. "Once I learn the architecture, I'll be faster." "Excuses," he murmured, but she thought she caught the faintest glint of interest in his eyes. He walked away, dialing someone on his phone. "No, I don't care if they're in Geneva. Get them on the line now," he said into the receiver. His voice was smooth and lethal, like a scalpel. Valeria kept her head down, fingers flying, determined not to give him the satisfaction of rattling her. By 7:30, she had flagged 5 inconsistencies, 2 likely typos, 3 potentially serious errors. She slid the annotated pages across the desk. You'll want to look at these before the board meeting. He skimmed them, then glanced up sharply. Who told you I have a board meeting today? You scheduled it for 9 a.m. It's in your public corporate calendar. Noted, he said, but his tone was unreadable. The rest of the morning was a crash course in Yakutu Group survival. He dictated replies to emails at a pace that made shorthand feel slow. He asked her to move a lunch with the Minister of Works to Thursday without making it sound like a demotion, then to book a site visit in Port Harcourt without wasting my time on weather updates. She had to think 3 moves ahead. What information he'd need, who would resist the change, what backup plan to have ready when they did. At 11:20, he glanced at his watch. We're going downstairs. She grabbed her notepad and followed him to a waiting car. The driver pulled into traffic toward Victoria Island. Where are we going? She asked. Meeting. With who? You'll find out when we get there, he said, eyes on his phone. It turned out to be a breakfast meeting at a boutique hotel with 2 European investors. Stephen didn't introduce her. He simply began talking business while she quietly took notes, catching the way his tone shifted depending on the audience. Precise with numbers, expansive with vision, ruthless with deadlines. When the waiter poured coffee, one of the investors turned to her. And you are? Valeria Obanduku, she said with a polite smile, executive assistant to Mr. Yakutu. New? The man asked. Today is my first day. Stephen's head turned slightly, as though evaluating her answer. She kept her gaze on the investor, steady. After the meeting, back in the car, Stephen said, You didn't embarrass me. I wasn't aware that was in the job description. It's the first requirement, he replied, almost as if he were joking, but not quite. The afternoon was worse. A shipment delay in a Papa port triggered a series of tense calls, during which Stephen's voice was a blade slicing through excuses. Valeria coordinated with the logistics manager, drafted a revised timeline, and emailed updates to affected clients before Stephen even asked. At 5:45 p.m., she was still at her desk when he emerged from his office. You're still here. There's an email I need to send before close of business, she said. He regarded her for a long moment. Most people run out at 5:01 to escape me. Maybe they should work faster. His mouth almost twitched. Tomorrow, 6:30. Don't be late. She waited until he left to allow herself a slow exhale. Her legs ached, her head throbbed, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in her chest. She had survived day 1. More than that, she had kept her standards intact in a world that seemed to run on intimidation. By the end of her second week at Yakutu Group, Valeria understood that Stephen Yakutu didn't simply work fast. He worked as though every second was a scarce currency only he knew how to spend. And his assistant? She was expected to predict every expenditure before he even reached for his metaphorical wallet. Calendar, he barked one Tuesday morning without looking up from his laptop. Valeria stepped forward. You have the board's audit committee at 9 o'clock, an environmental compliance briefing at 11:15, a working lunch with the Minister of Works at 1 o'clock, and cancel lunch. Her pen hovered. Should I reschedule? Cancel means cancel. She adjusted the day's grid in her mind. I'll call his office. Email, with the apology written so he's flattered. Valeria didn't sigh, though her ribs ached from the urge. She crafted the note in under 2 minutes, keeping the tone regretful but deferential, then sent it. She was already compiling the next set of documents when Stephen's voice cut through again. Valeria. She looked up. Coffee. 2 weeks ago, she might have bristled. Now she knew better. Coffee was never just coffee with Stephen Yakutu. It was a test of observation. How does she take her instructions? How quickly can she read my habits? She returned 3 minutes later with a black coffee, 2 sugars, and an email draft printed on his preferred cream bond paper. He glanced at both, said nothing, and continued typing. By noon, she had mediated a spat between 2 senior managers over a procurement order, reorganized a site visit itinerary after bad weather grounded flights, and prepared Stephen's speaking notes for an impromptu press briefing. She had also learned that urgent in his vocabulary meant yesterday, and that he would rather hear, I'm on it, than I'll try. At 2 p.m., he summoned her into his office. Sit. It wasn't a request. She took the chair opposite his desk. I'm going to dictate a letter. Listen, write it exactly as I say it. He didn't slow his speech. Names, figures, clauses. She caught them all. When he finished, he leaned back. Now read it. She read it back, word for word. His eyes narrowed slightly. No one else has ever done that on the first try. Perhaps you were speaking more clearly than usual, she said, just enough mischief in her tone to test the edge. His mouth twitched. Quick, almost human, and then it was gone. You'll do. They moved through the afternoon like chess players, each anticipating the other's moves. When a client called furious over a late payment, Valeria traced the delay to a missing signature in the finance department, got it signed, and emailed proof to the client within 20 minutes. Stephen didn't praise her, but he didn't need to. The fact that he moved on without demanding an explanation was acknowledgement enough. The only crack in the rhythm came at 5:30 p.m. when Stephen's younger brother, Tunde, strode in unannounced. He was all charm and casual linen, the opposite of Stephen's steel-edged presence. You're the new assistant, Tunde said, smiling at Valeria, as though she were a fresh exhibit in an art gallery. Valeria Obanduku, she said, standing. Don't encourage him, Stephen muttered without looking up. Tunde ignored him. Do you drink wine? She works for me, Stephen said sharply, finally glancing at his brother. Doesn't answer my question, Tunde said lightly. Anyway, welcome to the war zone. After Tunde left, Stephen said, Don't let him distract you. I'm here to work, not to drink wine, Valeria said, returning to her desk. By the time she shut down her computer at 7:45 p.m., the office was nearly empty. Stephen was still in his chair, eyes on his screen, the glow from the city beyond outlining his profile in sharp lines. Valeria hesitated at the doorway. Good night, sir, she said. He looked up briefly. Tomorrow, 6:30. It was the closest he came to good night. Outside, the Lagos night air was warm and buzzing. Valeria took a deep breath. She had survived another day in the fire and hadn't burned. Not yet. By her third week at Yakutu Group, Valeria had memorized the unspoken laws of working for Stephen Yakutu. They weren't in any handbook. HR didn't dare commit them to paper. But they ruled the 36th floor like scripture. Rule 1, never make him repeat himself. Rule 2, anticipate, don't react. Rule 3, if you must argue, win, but make him think it was his idea. Rule 4, silence is sometimes the safest answer. Rule 5, time is the only currency he respects. Spend it well. She learned them by observation, by missteps that didn't quite draw blood, and by watching how others failed. More than one department head had left his office with their confidence shattered, clutching a termination letter. Stephen didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His displeasure was a scalpel, not a hammer. But Valeria was different. She didn't seek his approval, only his trust in her work, and that slowly was what began to unsettle the rhythm of his days. One Monday morning, she intercepted a call from a supplier who had missed a crucial shipping deadline. The man on the line was defensive, blaming port congestion and unforeseen customs delays. Valeria listened, then calmly requested the shipping logs and customs clearance forms. She had them in her inbox within the hour. By 10 a.m., she was in Stephen's office with a printed summary. They lied, she said simply, placing the documents before him. He scanned them, eyes narrowing. You verified these? Twice. The delay wasn't customs, it was their internal dispatch. The logs showed they didn't even load until 3 days after the deadline. Stephen leaned back, regarding her with something like curiosity. Most people would have brought me the excuse, not the truth. Most people, she said, don't like to be the one delivering bad news. And you? I like problems solved before they land on your desk. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, inform procurement to terminate their contract, effective immediately. The shift was subtle at first. She noticed it when he started giving her tasks without excessive detail, trusting her to fill in the blanks. When he asked her to prepare the itinerary for his Abuja trip, she arranged the meetings in a sequence that minimized downtime, included buffer slots for overrun discussions, and booked him a return flight that avoided the evening delays, notorious at Nnamdi Azikiwe Airport. The morning he left for Abuja, he said only, "Good work." 2 words, but from Stephen Yakudu, they were as rare as rain in December. Not everyone appreciated the change. During a strategy meeting, the head of marketing, a slick man named Bayo, made a dig about Valeria, hovering like she runs the place. Stephen's gaze cut across the table. "She runs my office," Stephen said flatly, "which means she runs the part of this company that keeps your deadlines from imploding. You have a problem with that?" Bayo muttered something about just joking, but Valeria caught the flicker of respect in a few colleagues' eyes. By the end of the month, Valeria had begun to notice the cracks in Stephen's armor. Not weaknesses exactly, just moments when the relentless pace faltered. Once, late in the evening, she walked into his office with a contract and found him staring out at the lagoon, his jaw tight. She placed the file on his desk, about to leave, when he said quietly, "Do you know why I hate wasting time?" She hesitated. "Because it's the one thing you can't buy back." He turned, the faintest shadow in his eyes. "Because I watched someone I cared about waste all of theirs." It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Send the contract to legal," he said, and the moment closed like a door. The more she learned, the more she realized Stephen's arrogance wasn't careless. It was deliberate, a shield, a filter, a way of ensuring that only the most resilient people stayed in his orbit. And while she didn't agree with every method, she understood the logic. She began bending the rules in ways that made the machine run smoother. If a meeting was set to drag on, she'd slip Stephen a note suggesting a decisive close. If a report was likely to provoke his temper, she'd quietly verify its data before it reached him. If a department head came in ready for war, she'd soften the edges with a well-placed fact or reminder of shared goals. One Friday afternoon, Stephen caught her at it. "You told Aide to bring me the revised numbers before I asked." "They were wrong the first time," she said. "I thought you'd prefer the corrected version." "I do." His gaze held hers for a beat longer than necessary. "But you're making me predictable." "Or efficient," she countered. For the first time since she'd met him, Stephen Yakudu laughed. It was short, low, and so unexpected that Valeria felt it in her chest before she heard it. By the time the office closed that day, Valeria had the distinct sense that she'd crossed an invisible line. Not of romance, not yet, but of recognition. Stephen might never say please or thank you, but she could feel the shift in the air. She was no longer just surviving his arrogance. She was shaping it. And in Lagos, that was its own kind of power. The call came just after 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. Valeria was at her desk organizing Stephen's calendar when his office door opened and he stepped out, phone in hand, his expressions sharper than usual. "Cancel my morning meetings," he said, already moving toward the elevators. She stood. "Should I?" "Everything," he cut in, "and reschedule without excuses. I'll be gone all day." The doors slid shut before she could ask where he was going. It wasn't until late afternoon that she heard the whispers, an overheard comment from HR, a passing remark in the break room. Something about Stephen's younger sister. Valeria shut it out. Gossip wasn't her currency. At 7 p.m., she was packing up when the elevator chimed and Stephen returned. His tie was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. For the first time, he looked tired, not the calculated exhaustion of a man who wanted people to see his work ethic, but the raw kind that lives behind the eyes. "Do you need me to?" she began. "Sit," he said quietly. She sat. "My sister, Amara, was in an accident this morning. She's stable, but..." He trailed off, staring at the skyline beyond the glass. "She's the only family I have left who matters." Valeria didn't offer the usual, "I'm sorry," instead, she said, "What do you need?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, "I need someone to keep the company from falling apart while I'm not here." She leaned forward. "Tell me exactly what to protect." Over the next week, Stephen spent most of his time at the private hospital in Ikoyi, where Amara was recovering. He called in twice a day, sometimes to bark instructions, sometimes just to ask, anything I should know? Valeria became the quiet axis the office turned on. She fielded calls from restless board members, intercepted potential crises before they could reach him, and handled an internal conflict in the construction division with a firmness that surprised even her. She didn't try to imitate Stephen's style. She simply upheld his standards. One afternoon, when she brought documents to his temporary workspace at the hospital, she found him sitting beside Amara's bed. The girl, no, young woman, was pale but awake, scrolling through her phone. "This is Valeria," Stephen said. "My assistant." Amara smiled faintly. "The one who keeps him from throwing things?" "I try," Valeria said, setting the folder on the table. Stephen walked her to the hallway. "You didn't have to come here." "You didn't have to tell me about Amara," she replied. Something flickered in his expression. Acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude. But it passed quickly. "Get some rest tonight." Back at the office, whispers continued, but now they had a different tone. People noticed that Stephen's absence hadn't led chaos. The board noticed that reports were still on time. Clients noticed that schedules were still honored. And whether they said it aloud or not, they all knew why. When Stephen returned the following Monday, the first thing he did was call her into his office. "I've been gone a week, and the building is still standing." "I would hope so," she said, sitting. His gaze was steady. "You didn't just hold the line, you improved it." She shrugged lightly. "You said to protect what matters." For a moment, the air between them was different. Less boss and assistant, more something unspoken. Then Stephen leaned back. "Don't get used to me being sentimental." "I wouldn't dream of it," she said, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. That night, as Valeria left the building, she realized something had shifted. She had seen the man behind the marble, the one who guarded his family fiercely, who could be vulnerable without being weak. And now she knew. Arrogance was not the whole of Stephen Yakudu. It was just the armor. The question was, how much longer could she work beside him without wanting to see what else lay beneath? The rain came before noon, sudden and heavy, turning Victoria Island's polished streets into dark mirrors. Valeria was on the 36th floor, watching drops race down the glass, when her desk phone lit up. "Boardroom, now!" Stephen's voice was clipped. She grabbed her tablet and hurried down the corridor. Inside the boardroom, the air felt charged. The long glass table was crowded with directors, some shifting uncomfortably, others sitting rigid with arms crossed. At the far end, Stephen stood like a general before battle. Valeria slid into the seat beside him, pulling up the relevant files. On the wall screen, a headline blazed from the website of a major Lagos business daily: Yakudu Group under fire for project delays and cost overruns. Beneath it, subheadings detail stalled infrastructure work in Port Harcourt, ballooning costs on an oil terminal expansion, and speculation about executive disarray. One director cleared his throat. "We need a statement immediately, Stephen." Another jumped in. "We also need to identify who leaked the internal memos. Those figures weren't public." Stephen's expression didn't change, but Valeria saw the way his fingers flexed against the table edge. "We're not issuing a rushed statement just to look busy," he said. "We'll respond when we control the facts." "That could take days," the first director countered. Stephen turned to Valeria. "Summarize the current status of both projects." She tapped her tablet, projecting her screen onto the wall. "Port Harcourt's delays stem from environmental clearance backlogs. Our internal documents show the approval is now in its final stage, expected within 2 weeks. The oil terminal expansion faced unexpected supply chain disruptions, but procurement has secured alternative suppliers. Updated cost projections bring the overrun down by 15% compared to the leaked figures." Several heads turned. One director asked, "Where did you get those numbers?" "I requested them from project managers yesterday," Valeria replied calmly. "The reports came in this morning." Stephen glanced at her, something like approval in his eyes. "This is why we don't panic," he told the room. "We speak when we can prove the story wrong." After the meeting, as they walked back to his office, Stephen said, "You just made enemies in there." "I'm not here to win popularity contests," she said. His mouth quirked faintly. "Good. You're here to win wars. The storm outside matched the mood of the afternoon. By 2 p.m., Valeria was fielding calls from journalists. She filtered them ruthlessly, routing only the essential ones to Stephen, drafting holding responses for the rest. Yakuta Group is committed to delivering on all projects and will provide updates as facts are verified. At 4:15, Stephen emerged from a call with the Minister of Petroleum, his voice low but urgent. We need to meet him tonight. He doesn't want press coverage. Book the private dining room at Eco Hotel for 8 p.m. Done, Valeria said, already typing. And I'll make sure the entrance is clear of photographers. His gaze lingered a second longer than usual. Come with me. She hesitated. To the meeting? You have a better grasp of the numbers than half the board, and I'll need you to take notes. By evening, the rain had slowed to a fine mist. In the softly lit dining room, Stephen and the minister spoke in the measured tones of men accustomed to power. Valeria kept her notes precise, recording agreements on supply chain adjustments, assurances about regulatory clearance, and commitments to joint press statements. At one point, the minister glanced at her. You've trained her well, he said to Stephen. She trained herself, Stephen replied without looking at her. It was the closest thing to praise she'd heard from him in public. When they returned to the car, the city lights shimmered against the wet roads. Stephen loosened his tie slightly, leaning back in his seat. You handled yourself well. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he replied. You earned it. She looked out at the passing lagoon, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. The storm had tested them both, but for the first time they had faced it side by side. The blackout hit just after 9 p.m. Valeria was in Stephen's penthouse in Ikoyi, delivering the final signed agreements from the minister's office. She had planned to drop the file on his desk, answer any last-minute questions, and be back in her cab within 20 minutes. But as she was explaining a clause about delivery penalties, the lights went out with a deep, soft thunk, followed by the sudden hum of silence. Stephen glanced toward the windows. Beyond the glass walls, the skyline of Ikoyi and Victoria Island was a patchwork of darkness. Even the distant bridge lights were out. Grid collapse, he muttered. Valeria instinctively reached for her phone, but the screen stayed black. Battery dead. She had been on calls all day without noticing the percentage drop. Stephen's own phone lay charging in the study. He rose from his chair. Backup generators in the building should kick in. They didn't. For the first time since she'd met him, Stephen looked uncertain. Not in the way of a man who lacked control, but in the way of someone who'd been forced into stillness. I'll get candles, Valeria said, breaking the quiet. He raised an eyebrow. You know where I keep them? You don't strike me as the type to enjoy complete darkness, she replied, finding a drawer in the kitchen, stocked with emergency supplies. Within minutes, the penthouse glowed with the warm flicker of 3 candles. Stephen leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her. Most people panic when the lights go out. I grew up in a part of Enugu where we had power maybe 4 hours a day, she said, placing a candle on the coffee table. Darkness was normal. We just made it work. His gaze followed her as she moved around the room. I didn't grow up with that problem. I know, she said lightly. You've told me enough stories about boarding schools with their own generators. Something shifted in his expression. Not irritation, not arrogance, but curiosity. What else do you know about me? Public facts, she replied. You took over Yakuta Group at 29. You don't keep a personal assistant longer than a quarter, and you treat time like a scarce mineral. He smirked faintly. And private facts? She set the last candle down before answering. You're loyal to the few people you let close. You notice everything but pretend you don't, and you use arrogance to keep people from asking the wrong questions. Silence stretched between them. The candlelight caught the sharp planes of his face, softening them. You're not wrong, he said finally, but you left one thing out. What's that? I don't like being alone when it's this quiet. They ended up on the couch, the file on the table between them. Without the constant buzz of devices, the penthouse felt different, more human. Stephen poured 2 glasses of water, And for a while they sat in companionable silence, the city's darkness pressing in. "How's your sister?" Valeria asked quietly. "She's healing. The accident shook her, but she'll be fine." He paused. "She likes you. I've only met her once. Once was enough. She says you don't treat me like I'm made of glass or gold." Valeria smiled faintly. "You're not." He studied her for a long moment. "Most people think I am, or they want me to be. Maybe they just don't know the difference between strength and distance," she said. He leaned back, his gaze never leaving hers. "And you do?" "I think so." The blackout stretched into its second hour. The generators finally hummed back to life at 11:30 p.m., flooding the penthouse with cool white light. But the atmosphere between them didn't change. The unspoken truths lingered, electric in a different way. As Valeria gathered her things to leave, Stephen said, "I'll have the driver take you home." "I can get a cab." "I insist." She hesitated, then nodded. "Good night, Stephen." "Good night, Valeria." And as she stepped into the elevator, she realized the blackout hadn't just cut the power. It had stripped away a layer of distance neither of them had been willing to touch before. The leak hit the news on a Thursday morning, and this time it wasn't about delayed projects or cost overruns. It was about them. Valeria stepped into the office at 6:20 a.m., coffee in hand, only to find the reception area buzzing. A junior analyst whispered her name to another staffer. Someone's eyes darted away the moment she looked up. On her desk, a printout waited, a headline from a popular Lagos gossip site. Yakudu Group, CEO in secret relationship with his assistant, photos inside. Beneath it were grainy telephoto shots of her and Stephen in the Echo Hotel's private dining room during the minister's meeting. The angle made it look like they were leaning toward each other intimately, heads close, hands brushing. The article spun it into a full-blown affair, implying she had been favored for her role and hinting at preferential treatment in company decisions. Valeria's chest tightened. She knew exactly what this could do, not just to her reputation, but to the credibility she had worked to earn in a place that judged her twice as harshly for being a young woman. Stephen arrived at 6:35, eyes like flint. He tossed a copy of the same printout onto her desk. "My office. Now." Inside, he closed the door with controlled force. "Do you know who could have taken these?" "Anyone at the hotel with a camera," she said evenly. "But the gossip sites don't pay for blurry photos unless someone sells the story." His jaw worked. "Which means someone in this company, or the minister's circle." She folded her arms. "What's the plan?" "You stay quiet. Let me handle it." Her head snapped up. "Stay quiet? Stephen, this makes it look like I slept my way into this job, that I'm some decoration you keep around. Better they think that than—" He stopped himself. "Then what?" she demanded. "Then knowing how much you matter here," he said finally, voice low. The words caught her off guard, but only for a second. "No, I'm not going to sit here and let people think my career is a joke. Valeria, I have worked too hard to be reduced to a rumor." They stared at each other across the desk, pride clashing with something deeper. Outside, the office was waking up, but in that room, time felt still. By noon, the story had made it to 2 business blogs. HR emailed Stephen about potential reputational risks. A board member called, subtly suggesting Valeria be reassigned for optics. Stephen shut it down with a clipped, "Not happening," but his eyes were stormy when he hung up. At 1 o'clock, Valeria walked into his office. "I'm resigning." His head snapped up. "No. It's the cleanest way to make this die down. You keep your reputation, and I walk away with mine intact." "You think I care about my reputation?" he said, rising from his chair. "I think you care about control," she shot back. "And right now, this is out of both of our hands." He came around the desk, stopping just a breath away. "You're not leaving. Not because of a lie. Not because some coward thinks they can weaponize your presence here." Her voice softened, but her stance didn't. "I won't be anyone's consolation prize, Stephen. If I stay, it has to be on my terms." Something in his expression shifted. Less CEO, more man. Then name them. She took a breath. Publicly clear my name. Make it known I was hired because I'm good at my job, not because of gossip. And don't make decisions for me behind closed doors. He held her gaze for a long beat. Then slowly, he nodded. Done. The next morning, Stephen stood before the entire board and several department heads. Valeria sat to one side, hands steady in her lap. Yesterday's gossip was not only false, he said, voice even but carrying across the room. It was an insult to the professionalism of my assistant. Miss Obanduku was hired on merit. Her work has improved the efficiency of this office and the stability of our operations. Anyone who doubts that can read the last 3 months' performance reports. She stays. That's final. No one argued. That afternoon, the gossip sites quietly updated their articles, replacing the insinuations with a clipped, Yakudu Group denies rumors. Inside the office, the whispers died down. But for Valeria, something permanent had changed. She had drawn a line, and Stephen had chosen to stand on her side of it. Whether that was pride, heart, or both, she didn't know yet. The board coup came quietly. At first, Valeria sensed it in the way two directors stopped speaking when she walked into the corridor, in the sudden flurry of closed-door meetings Stephen wasn't invited to, in the late-night calls from unknown numbers that left him staring out his office window longer than usual. By Tuesday, the whispers became fact. A faction within the board was moving to replace him as CEO. The official reason was stability after recent controversies. But Valeria knew the truth. It was a power grab. They saw an opening after the gossip scandal and wanted to force him out before his influence could rebound. Stephen didn't confirm it until Thursday morning. They've called for an emergency vote next week, he said, setting a slim folder on her desk. If they win, I'm out. Her fingers brushed the folder. And if you fight, they'll drag you into it, use the rumors again, paint you as a liability. Her instinct was to say, I can handle it. But then she saw something rare in his expression. Not fear exactly, but calculation tinged with something more personal. What's your move? She asked. He leaned against the edge of her desk. I have one asset they can't control. My own shares, enough to block the vote if I align with the right partners. But it means ceding certain powers. To who? To you. The words hit her like a physical thing. Stephen, you've already been running this office. This makes it official. Interim COO, public announcement before the vote. Her breath caught. That's dangerous, he finished. It will make you a target, but it will also make it impossible for them to say, you're just here because of me. She searched his face. Why are you doing this? Because you said you wouldn't stay unless it was on your terms. His voice dropped, almost rough. And because I don't want to do this without you. The announcement broke the next morning. Yakudu Group appoints Valeria Obanduku as interim Kopuru. Business media picked it up immediately, the coverage focusing on her credentials and her role in recent crisis management. The board's faction didn't look pleased. At 8:15 a.m., Stephen walked into her office. Come with me. She followed him to the boardroom where the vote was about to begin. The faction leader, a man in his 60s with the polished air of someone used to winning, smirked at Stephen. Bringing your protege to watch you fall? Stephen didn't flinch. Bringing my partner. Hang. The room stilled. The vote was tense, hands raised and counted with the precision of a courtroom clerk. When it came to Stephen's turn, he stood. I vote no, he said, voice carrying. And I exercise my right to block this motion under Section 4.3 of the Charter. He slid a signed document across the table. Effective immediately, certain operational powers transfer to interim COO Valeria Obanduku. The legal advisor examined the paper, then nodded reluctantly. The motion fails. The faction leader's jaw tightened. This isn't over. It is for today, Stephen said, gathering his papers. Thank you for your time. Outside the boardroom, Valeria exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. You just risked your position for me. Stephen stopped, turning to face her fully. For the first time since she'd known him, there was no shield in his expression, just raw truth. You were never a risk, he said quietly. You were the reason I wanted to fight. Something in her chest shifted. Stephen, I'm not good at this, he interrupted. I don't say things the right way, but I'm going to try this once and only once. Please, stay. It was the first time she'd heard him say please. The word hung between them, heavier than any boardroom victory. She felt her lips curve, slow and certain. On my terms, only yours. And in that moment, she knew the arrogance was still there, but so was something else, something worth staying for. 6 months later, Lagos was in bloom. The rains had passed, the skies were a deep, endless blue, and the lagoon shimmered under the morning sun like liquid glass. From the 36th floor of the Yakutu Group Tower, the city looked like it belonged to anyone bold enough to claim it. Valeria stood by the window of her office now, watching the ferries cut silver lines through the water. She was no longer the assistant. She was the company's official chief operating officer, confirmed by a unanimous board vote last month. The interim title was gone, the work was still relentless, but it was hers. A soft knock on the door drew her out of her thoughts. Stephen leaned against the frame, coffee in one hand, a faint smile on his lips. You have that look. What look? She asked, turning back to the view. The look of someone deciding whether to conquer the next 6 months or take them apart piece by piece. She laughed quietly. Maybe both. He crossed the room and set the coffee on her desk. Board wants us to brief the press next week about the new East-West expansion. You're leading it. I thought you hated press conferences, she teased. I do, but I like watching you turn reporters into believers. It still caught her off guard sometimes, the way he spoke now. Still blunt, still direct, but threaded with a respect that hadn't been there at the start. Later that afternoon, they walked the length of the sky bridge connecting the tower to the new annex. The staff they passed greeted them with easy smiles, not the wary glances that had once followed every step Valeria took. The whispers were gone. The rumors had been replaced with something far more dangerous to Stephen's rivals. Proof. Proof that she had earned her place. Proof that together they worked like twin engines, different but perfectly in sync. Halfway across the bridge, Stephen stopped, hands in his pockets, looking out over the lagoon. Do you remember the first day I interviewed you? How could I forget? You made me rewrite an email and reschedule a meeting before I'd even been hired. And you didn't flinch. He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. That was when I knew you'd last longer than 3 months. She shook her head. You thought I'd last 3 months? At best, you surprised me. That evening, they attended a charity gala at the Civic Center. The city's elite swirled in silk and tuxedos under crystal chandeliers. Cameras flashed, and this time neither of them avoided the lens. Stephen introduced her not as his assistant, not even as his COO, but as Valeria Obanduku, my partner in every sense of the word. She caught the raised brows, the calculating looks. But it didn't matter. The people who mattered knew the truth, and the rest would learn in time. On the balcony later, away from the noise, they looked out at the lagoon again, its surface holding the reflections of Lagos's lights. You ever think about leaving? He asked quietly. She thought of the girl who had stepped off the bus with a suitcase and a folder of CVs. Once, a long time ago. And now? Now, she said, meeting his eyes. I think about staying. On my terms. He reached for her hand, not in the commanding way he used to, but in the quiet certainty of a man who had learned the difference between control and trust. The lagoon kept its secrets that night, but if anyone had been watching from the water, they would have seen 2 figures standing close on the balcony of Lagos's most powerful tower. No longer Mr. Arrogant and his assistant, but equals, building something neither of them had planned for, but both had chosen. And for Valeria Obanduku, that was the real victory.